Hey guys, in this screencast I'm going to show you how to set up a Fedora server for running Postgres and Rails applications, then deploy an application using Capistrano. The first thing we're going to do is create a deployer user with sudo access. We'll use the deployer to install the required packages and make configuration changes. Once the deployer has been created, we'll set up SSH key logins. Using the keys will make it easier to log in and out and save some headaches down the line with Capistrano. After we're set on the deployer, we'll set up Postgres and PHP PgAdmin so you can administer your database remotely. Next, we'll set up Ruby, Ruby Gems, and Passenger. After those building blocks are in place, we'll be ready to begin the deploy process. So as I said, the first thing we're going to do is create the deployer using the add user command. And you can see here I'm running Fedora inside a virtual machine. You can use your own server, or if you just want to practice, you can set up a virtual machine for yourself. But the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and create our deployer using the add user command. Now that the deployer is created, we need to set the password. And now we need to give the user sudo access, and when we give them access, we're not going to require the user to enter a password. So we'll have to edit the sudo configuration file using vi sudo. And go ahead and scroll down to where you find the user definitions, and we're going to add a line for the deployer like this. And save the file. Alright. Now we should be able to log in as the deployer and run sudo commands without the password. So let's just test that real quick. Let's su to deployer. And let's just do a dummy sudo command. Cool. Alright, see, no password required. The next thing we need to do is copy or set up SSH keys. And how SSH keys work is, on the system you want to log in from, you take that key and add it to the computer you want to log in to. So for this to work, I'm going to open up a terminal on my Mac here. And so what I'm going to do is take the key I have on this computer and add it to the authorized keys file on this computer over here. I already have a key generated, but if you don't, you can run the SSH keygen command to do it, and it will guide you through the process. So how I'm going to do it is I'm going to show you where the keys are first. They're inside the .ssh directory, and you can see right here I have my public key, and inside here is some plain text or encrypted text that we're going to paste into a file on here called authorized keys 2. So for this to work, I need to copy the contents of this file and paste it into a file on the Fedora system. So I'm going to cat the contents. And put it on my clipboard. Now over here, I need to create the files for this to work. So the first thing I have to do is create the .ssh directory and the file in there called authorized keys 2. And for this to work, you need the permissions to be set correctly in that directory and the files inside that directory. The only user who should have access to the .ssh directory is the owner. And there should be no group permissions and no other permissions. So we're going to create the directory and then set it to mode 700. So just go ahead and make the directory and then touch the authorized keys 2 file and then change the whole thing Now go ahead and open up the authorized keys 2 file and paste the key in there. Now, if you haven't installed SSH already, depending on your installation options, you can install it. It's real easy. Just use yum install sshd. I think I already have it on this computer, so it will report back nothing to do, or I think it's just SSH, my mistake. But just make sure SSH is started. Okay, now we should be able to log in from the host computer over here to this one. But first, we need to find out the IP address of the Fedora system. So you can just use ifconfig to find out the IP address. And you can see right here it's 92.168.1.112. So go ahead and SSH as the deployer into 192.168.1.112. And if you haven't logged in before, I'll ask you to accept the RSA key fingerprint. Just hit yes, and boom, you're in. So now we're going to follow through using this shell here for the rest of the time. Easier to work with this window than the windows inside the virtual machine. So the next thing we're going to do is set up Postgres. This process is pretty easy on Fedora. You can install the group package to install the server, and then we're going to initialize the database, start the server, set the root user password, and configure PHP PgAdmin. So the first thing we need to do is install the PostgreSQL group, and you can do this through the group install option for yum. Go ahead and install it. I've already installed it on this computer, so it's not going to do anything, but if you have to, there's no interactivity. You just run it and the packages will be installed. So the first thing we're going to do is run the initialization routine, and this is part of the init service, so you can run it through service as well. And what it's going to do is create the initial database files that we need to start using our database. Oh, my mistake. I have it installed before on this computer, so I need to go ahead and reset it. So I'm going to pause it real quick, and we'll come back when that's fixed. Sorry about that. I had it installed. I needed to go remove the directory. So I'm going to go ahead and rerun the service again. And this may look like a prompt, but what it is actually just running in the background, so you don't need to hit enter. It may take a minute, but just wait and it will say OK when it's done. Alright, so now what we need to do is start the service. Alright, so now we need to set the password for the user Postgres, and there's two different things going on here. There's a user on the system called Postgres, which runs the PostgreSQL database on the computer, but there's also a user called Postgres in the database, so you can log into your installation as Postgres. And what becomes complicated here is the PostgreSQL client authentication settings are much more complicated than what you might be used to on, say, for example, MySQL. So you can't just log in right away to the Postgres account. So what we need to do is become the Postgres user on this computer and then start an SQL terminal so where you can set the password. So to do this, we're just going to use sudo to become Postgres. Okay, now we're in Postgres as a shell, so we can start a PostgreSQL terminal similar to MySQL, and we're going to use the template1 database, which is the default database generated from the initdb command. So just go ahead and connect, and now right here you can tell that you're connected and it's ready to accept queries. So we're going to use a query here that says update the password, and put your own password in here, but remember, this is the password for your database user, and I'll just use a dummy password here. And don't forget the semicolon, it's very important. If you don't use the semicolon, the command won't get executed and caused me a few headaches in the past. So just go ahead and hit enter, and you should see alter role knowing that it worked. And at this point you can exit the shell by doing \q and then exit again. Alright, now we are ready to go and install PHP PgAdmin, and there's a handy yum package for this you can just install, and it's PHP PGAdmin. Just go ahead and install it, and then we'll create a virtual host definition for the PHP PGAdmin program. But before we can do this, we have to set the Postgres client authentication settings. Before, how it worked is you were only able to log in as the user you were in the shell. But since we're going to set up a remote administration utility like PHP PGAdmin, we have to set it so other users can log in using their name and password. So the file to do this is PGHBA.conf, which is a client authentication configuration file, and it's located inside the data directory. So what we're going to do is open that file up and set it to say that users must enter their passwords to log in. So that's in here. It's in var lib pgsql data pghba.conf. Nano. Alright, I'm going to scroll down here to where everything is. You can see here, right here, there is different methods of authentication, and we were using ident before, but now we're going to use MD5, and as you can see, there's many different options. If you want to learn more about this, I highly recommend that you check out the documentation, because it can be pretty confusing and there's a lot going on here, and if you want to learn about it, the only way you can is by reading the docs. So here, down here, we have the configuration, and we're going to just change this down to MD5. Okay, save this file and then reload the service. I might have to restart it. I can't recall offhand, but it's better safe than sorry. Okay, now at this point, since we've set the password for Postgres in the database, we have to set the password for the Postgres user on the system. So if you wanted to log in from a terminal like this, you'd have to become Postgres first, and by default the Postgres user doesn't have a password, so you have to set the password now. This will be different than the password you use to log into PHP PGAdmin, so just keep that in mind. Okay, now we're ready to go ahead and fix up PHP PGAdmin. So now we would be able to we could check to see if PG admin is working. So here on the host system, let's open up Firefox here and check out PHP PG Admin. So localhost PHP PG Admin. Oh, my mistake. We have to make sure that Apache is started. Alright, now Apache started. Let's go back. Alright, and you can see our server over here. You can try to log in as Postgres using the password you entered from the SQL shell. And it's going to say login disallowed for security reasons. This is expected because out of the box, PHP PgAdmin does not allow you to log in as Postgres or root or administrator or similar names like that. So we're going to go ahead and edit the PHP PgAdmin configuration file, which is in the etc. directory. And we're going to scroll down to the point where it says extra security, and we're going to turn this off so we can log in as Postgres. And let's try logging in again. Boom. Okay, now we're in. So we could go ahead and create our user that we'd use for the application in the databases, but we're going to hold off on that for a sec and go ahead and get Ruby set up. But there's one thing I forgot to mention. If you can't access HTTP, make sure you have the firewall allowing HTTP traffic. So because the next thing we're going to do is make sure you can access it remotely. So down here at the bottom, www, make sure this is checked, because if not, you won't be able to access your application in the future. So the next thing we're going to do is make it so we can access PHP PgAdmin remotely. So to do this, we have to set an allow from directive allowing our IP address to access that URL. And if you look in here, we'll show you the virtual host definition for PHP PgAdmin. That's in the etc. directory as well. And we're just going to go ahead and add our IP address. So we can say allow from 192.168.1.106. And if you're not familiar with what your IP address is, you can just open up a new terminal on your host system and do ifconfig as well. And you can see right here, here's my address. So go ahead and save this and reload Apache. Now from a host system here, let's head to the address, and now we should be able to access it and log in as usual. But the next thing we're going to do is set up Ruby gems and Passenger. So to do this, you're going to use the group install again to install all the various Ruby packages, and then install Ruby gems, and then the passenger gem. So the first thing we're going to do is install the Ruby group. And I already have this package installed on the system. It's a pretty big package. It may take a little while to download and install. But once again, there's no interactivity. You just install it and come back to it later. And then go ahead and install Ruby gems. And I, once again, already have this installed on this computer. So the next thing we're going to do is install gem cutter using the gem command. And we're going to need to install a gem to allow our Rails application to communicate with Postgres. And to do this, first you have to install the PostgreSQL development package. It will give you the headers because the Postgres gem has to be compiled against the headers. So go ahead and install the PostgreSQL devel package. And again, I already have it installed. And then we're going to go ahead and install the PG gem. And as you can see, it's compiling, and we'll install the documentation. So the next thing we're going to do is install the passenger gem, which will give us the command to generate the Apache 2 module, which we'll use to run our application through Apache. So you can just install that gem like normal. So after this is done, we'll be able to run the command passenger install Apache 2 module, which will compile and generate the module, which we can load into Apache. But with some foresightedness that I have, it's going to prompt us for some packages to install, and I have them right here. If you don't have these packages installed when you run the command, it will just tell you that you need to install them and tell you how to install them. It will essentially just give you this command, but I'm going to go ahead and run it beforehand. But once again, I already have these packages installed on the system. So what we need to do now is generate the mod Rails module. So we're going to use the passenger install Apache 2 module to do it, and it's just a guided process. You don't have to do anything besides hit enter. So it will give you a little wizard. You just hit enter, and it'll go check the required software. This is what I was talking about. I already have the things, but if you don't, it will tell you what packages to install and how to install them. And it's going to go ahead and compile this. And then what it's going to do is spit out some Apache configuration stuff what we can use to load the module. So once that's done, we're going to just copy that and put it inside the conf.d directory as a configuration file to load the module. And see, here is the configuration stuff. So I'm just going to copy this, and then we'll use that to install the module. Just hit enter, and it'll give you a sample virtual host definition that we'll come back to later. So now what we need to do is go inside the Apache configuration directory and create this configuration file. And I already have it here from some testing I did, but it's essentially the exact same thing that was in here. I'll just show you it just in case. And it's just the same thing from right there. I just copied and pasted it into this file. into passenger.conf. Make sure it's a .conf file so Apache will load it. By default, the Fedora Apache configuration is to load all files inside conf.d with a .conf extension. So go ahead and restart Apache. But before we can restart Apache, there is one very big potential problem that we have to talk about. If you've used Fedora before, you may know about SE Linux, and the way Passenger works is it wants to create some files inside the temp directory, which SE Linux is going to block. So important note for the rest of this screencast that I'm going to disable SE Linux only because it makes the purpose of illustrating the deployment process simpler. But if you're going to deploy this on an intense production machine, you'll have to learn about SE Linux. And if you do already know and are familiar with SE Linux, I don't want to go and tell you how to set up your own policies, because it's very dependent on your application and your server in general. So you can just turn SE Linux off by using set enforce to 0. And you know, from personal experience, I know that SE Linux has caused me major headaches in the past. So now we are ready to restart Apache with the passenger module. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go on and get ready to deploy our application. So what we have to do is create a directory that the deployer has basically almost full control over, and also that directory should have some web server access. So what we're going to do is create a new directory inside the document root. We'll call it apps, and we'll give the deployer full control, and we'll also make that a member of the Apache group. So maybe in the future, if the web server needs write access, it'll be easier to do that. But in this screencast, we're not going to set anything like that up. But if you do in the future, you can use Capistrano tasks to easily maintain file permissions. For example, if you needed to, if you had an application that had image uploading and one directory inside public and you needed to have web server access, you could easily set the a Capistrano task to always ensure that that directory is, say, group writable by the Apache group. So the first thing we're going to do is create that directory and then set the permissions. And we're just going to make it in HTML apps. And then we're going to change the ownership to deployer in Apache. Alright, now before we can go on to the next step, we're going to use Git as our source control management, and we'll need to install Git on the server here when we actually go ahead and deploy the application. So go ahead and install it. I think I already have it installed on this computer as well. Yeah, so continue on after that's done. So now what we need to do is check out our code. I've created, well, I haven't created, I'm going to use the code from a previous article I did for NetTuts, the 0-60 article with the bookshelf application, and you can find it here on my GitHub, which will be linked in the article itself, and it's basically an exact copy of the bookshelf code, but I didn't want to mess up that repository because we're going to need to change the database configuration. So you can just use the public Git URL and clone that onto your system. Now, I've already cloned it and have my directory open. So go ahead and open that up. Let's see. So on your local system, I'm going to open it with TextMate. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to get this ready for Capistrano. And Capistrano is a gem you can install just like most other Ruby things. So go ahead and install it on the computer you want to use it from. This is important, it's not the server, it's the computer you want to deploy from. So now that Capistrano is installed, we can go ahead and use this command called capify, which will create our cap file inside the config directory. So what you want to do is see right here, I am inside the project directory, and you want to run the command called capify and use the dot to represent this directory. And you can see right here that it's created these new files for us. And you can see right here, config deploy. And here is we're going to spend a lot of time working inside this file. And it's got some bare bones stuff that we're going to configure. So the first thing we're going to do is set the application. And this will be the name of your application. So I'm going to call it NetTouch Demo. And what this is going to do when you deploy is create a file structure like this. So that directory would be created on the server, and we're going to need to pay attention to this later because we're going to use it in our virtual host definition. So, and then repository. You can use a public URL for my code if you want to, but important to note that if you're going to deploy from a private repository, you'll have to have SSH keys set up. So you have to generate a key on the server and add that to the authorized keys for your GitHub account. So keep that in mind when you're actually deploying your applications. So let's go ahead and copy that address. Alright, so then we have this, and set the SCM to Git, and we'll just delete these comments here. And here we'll have to set the IP address for the server and stuff like that. So it has different IP addresses for your web, your application, and your database servers. For example, your web server might serve up static content like images or videos or something like that, and then your app runs your application, and then you may have different database servers, but for most situations we use about the same thing. Just go ahead and put the server IP address in for these. I'm going to copy this. Okay, then down here we can see that there's some stuff commented out, and it says if you're using mod Rails, uncomment this. So what we're going to do, or Passenger, is uncomment this stuff, and it will just change some default tasks. Now, at this point, we're almost ready to copy our code to the server, but we need to have some more configuration. We need to tell Capistrano that it's going to be using the deployer, and so you can use the set command to set Capistrano variables. Just set it to deployer. Okay, now we have to tell Capistrano where to copy the code to. We're going to use the deploy to variable for that one. And we'll just copy it from the show notes here. And now what this means is copy it to the application directory, which is the directory we set up before. And inside here, application refers to this setting here. Next thing we're going to do is tell it by default that it doesn't need to use sudo because the deployer has access to the directory they're going to be using. Now, at this point, we're almost ready to copy the code. So let's just make sure that everything is in place first. So save this file. But now let's go to the command line here. And to run your Capistrano task, it's just like running a rake task. And you can find your task out by using cap T, which will list all the tasks. And so the first thing we're going to do is go through these tasks and see which ones we're going to use first. Deploy is the default task, but we're not going to use that yet. First, we have to use deploy setup, which will create the structure inside the deploy to folder. And Capistrano does some cool stuff when it does this. One thing you can notice here is that it has these tasks for rollback. So each time you do another deployment, it creates a new folder and then symlinks it to a current directory so you can use and roll back your applications. If something happens with one deployment, you can easily roll back without having to do really anything else besides running this task. So let's go ahead and run the deploy setup. You have to do setup first because it will create the application structure. You can't just deploy it because it will try to copy code. You can use deploy cold, which essentially runs deploy setup, and then the deploy. But we're not quite ready for that. Our setup will be slightly more complicated. So let's go ahead and do the setup task. So use the cap command and then just do deploy setup. And you can see here it created a whole bunch of stuff in there. So let's just go ahead and look at this directory for fun. So we have in here, we have the releases directory and the shared directory. So each time you do deploy, it's going to create another directory in here with name is going to be a timestamp with the code from that deployment. And the most interesting or most important folder is this file right here, shared. Now, like for example, if you are uploading images, you're going to want that to be persistent through every deployment. Like for example, user uploads one image and then you deploy some updated code. You don't want them to lose that image. So if you look inside shared, there's some other directories, and one of them is system, which contains the public directory, which I guess is created when you actually deploy. But so there's some things going on here that you need to pay attention to, which don't only affect us now. So now we're ready to go ahead and actually copy our code over to the server. So you just use the cap deploy. And what it's going to do is check out the code from the repository and then put it on the server. But if you're watching this and you're familiar with the Rails application process, you know that on the server we haven't installed the Rails gem yet, or we haven't even configured our database or our gems. I just wanted to give you a sneak preview about how it would work. So the first thing we're going to have to do is go back to the computer or the server and install the Rails gem. And this is going to take a minute while Rails is installing the documentation and all the different gems it has. So we're going to go over here and talk more about the Capistrano process. So what we need to do now is first set up our database. So we'll just open the database YAML file and set our connection property. So and we haven't set up the user of the database yet. We're going to go and do that next. So let's just write down first what we're going to use, and let's just call it nettuts demo. Host, localhost, username, nettuts, and password. Just call it nettuts. And right here you can see the database password will be stored in plain text in your repository. If that's a problem for you, and it usually is, you can use some Ruby code here if you wanted to, say, for example, store it on a file in the host system. You can read that file and paste it in here. Or, for example, on Heroku, you can use files and to set environment variables and then access an environment variable here. So, for example, you can use an environment variable to set your S3 bucket keys, which you don't want those being public, and then just reference them through the environment command. I'll just save this file here, and then we're ready to go into PHP PGAdmin and create all this stuff. So let's go back and create it. So let's log in. Let's create a new role. Let's call it nettuts password. Same password used in the configuration. And let's give it these privileges. Make sure it can log in, and then create it. Let's create a new database. And what did I say it was? Okay, nettuts demo. So I'll create the new database, nettuts demo, and use UTF-8. Now let's go ahead and set the privileges. Let's alter it, make it owned by nettuts, and go ahead and do the privileges and just grant it all privileges. Alright, so now we should be able to log in as nettuts and do our stuff with the database. So Capistrano comes with a rig task to set up the remote database. Just go back to the cap tasks here, and right here you can see cap deploy migrate, which is similar to the rigdb migrate command, but only uses the production environment. So let's run that task. I canceled it because how this is going to work is first we have to make sure that well, the problem is that this local change we made right here isn't in the source control, so we have to commit this change and then push it to the repository. So let's just add all those files just for a shortcut. Let's commit it. And let's do git push origin. All right, and now we can go ahead and deploy our new code with our database connection information with cap deploy. And then we'll go over here and I'll illustrate what it's doing. Let's go back. So now, as you can see, we have a deployment. We have a current directory, which is a symlink to somewhere in the releases directory. See, right here through this. So let's just go into releases. You can see we have two different releases and they're time-stamped, so we can roll back between them. So now that we have it, let's our database connection code on the server. We can run the migration task. Now went ahead and created all our migrations. Now we're almost ready to create or to start running our application. There's two things we have to do next or before. The first thing is we have to make sure that the gems required for the application are installed on the host system. Now we could go over to the computer over here and run the rake task and install the gems, but that doesn't really work as well. What the benefit of using Capistrano and keeping your cap file is you can use the same cap file to potentially deploy your application on different servers over and over again without having to do any. You can keep the whole process dry or do not repeat yourself. So we're going to write a little cap task to install the gems for us. So let's go back to the cap file here, and we're going to make a new task to install the gems. And before you do a task, you always use the describe function. Just say it installs required gems. And then let's just call it gems and roles app do. And then we're going to take a little snippet of code that I have right here. And what that's going to do is change directory into the current release, and then use sudo to install the gems for the production environment. And what we want to do is this task should really be part of the server setup process. And what's nice about Capistrano is you can use a whole bunch of different callbacks to really customize the workflow. So for example, if we want to do a cold deployment of its application, we do the setup thing, which would then also call the gems to install the required gems. So we can just use the after command to set up our callback. So we do after deploy setup deploy gems. Now if you're wondering where this came from, you can see that we're in the deploy namespace. So this task here is going to be in the deploy namespace. So now we can go back to our file, our terminal here on the local machine, and run the cap task. And after you write new tasks, you should always check to make sure that they're there. So you can see right here, cap deploy gems installs required gems. If you had left out this function right here, it would not show up in the list. So if you want to see everything, you have to use the verbose flag. So go ahead and run that. And it's going to go ahead and install all the required gems. Oops, my mistake. I forgot to add one configuration. You must have a TTY to run sudo. So go ahead and set the default run options using this little snippet and just paste it into the cap file. and just go ahead and rerun it. And this is where giving the deployer sudo access without the password is very handy. Otherwise, it could get complicated to enter the password here. We can get annoying, especially if your deploy process is long and you don't want to have to sit there and babysit to make sure you have to put the password in. And I've already actually installed the gems. That's why this command hasn't reported anything was installed. But if you hadn't, you would see your list here. So now we're about ready to get our application going. But just I want to illustrate to you that that our gems command is going to be called after the setup command. So we can do cap deploy and if you already set up, it's not going to do anything. The directories are already going to be created. But we should see our setup, our gem command being called. See right here, triggering callback for deploy setup, executing deploy gems. All right, cool. Now we're ready to get our application installed or configured with Apache. So the first thing we need to do is create a new virtual host, which points to our application. So what we're going to do is go back to our SSH connection here, and we're going to make a new directory called vhost.d inside the Apache configuration directory. So let's just go into the etc Apache directory. Let's make a new directory. And then nettouch demo.vhost. And I have it here. I'm just going to copy and paste. It's pretty much right out of the manual. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about this here. So first thing you'll notice is document root. And it's important that document root has to point to public. Otherwise, you will not get your application functioning correctly. And notice here we have current. So point to our current release. And right here we have the configuration options, and these have to be there, especially no multi-views. This is a mistake. We want that out of there. We want to false symlinks. And server name. nettouchdemo.com isn't actually a real domain name. I just have it in inside my host file for this example. You know, you would naturally replace this with whatever your domain was. I'm just going to go ahead and fix this up. It should be nettouchdemo.com, and go ahead and save that file. Now we need to tell Apache to include all the files inside the vhost.d directory. So let's edit the Apache configuration file. And just down at the bottom, we're going to add one little line to include all the files inside the vhost.d directory ending in .vhost. Save the file, and then let's reload it, restart Apache. All right, now let's see if we can get to our application. And that's going to be accessible from the root URL. Let's head back to our browser and head to nettouchdemo.com. Before we go to the application, I just realized we made a quick mistake. As you can see here, we have the nettouch demo file not inside the vhost directory. So just move that in there. And then run http//, also check the syntax and show you your virtual host, and go ahead and reload Apache. Alright, now let's see if we can get to our application. And voila, we have my basic application here. And as you can see, the first time you go to your application, sometimes it takes time for Passenger to spawn on the process that needs to, to do all this. But once your application gets going, it's usually pretty snappy depending on your server. So now we can go on and take advantage of some other stuff in Capistrano. So if you look here, let's go back to the file here, and let's just check this out, are some other tasks. And right here are two very handy commands. This will put up a maintenance page or remove a maintenance page. So whenever somebody tries to go to your application, they'll get a maintenance page. So for example, if you're doing some maintenance on the site, you're updating your code, you can go on and use these commands to easily turn on and off your website while presenting a decent page to your users. So the first thing we have to do is do some Apache rewrite rules saying that if the maintenance file is there, to rewrite all URLs to a new address. So I'm going to just take a snippet here, and we're going to have to add this inside our virtual host definition. So just edit that file again, and nettuts, and we're just going to go ahead and paste this snippet in here. Format this a little better. Which basically says, if the maintenance page is there, rewrite all URLs to that address. Let's go ahead and save this file. Got a sudo. Alright, now reload Apache as usual. Alright, now let's run this task here, the cap deploy disable task. Deploy web disable. And this is going to create a maintenance page for us. Now, let's go ahead, and as you can see here, it also gives you the snippet to add if you don't know it. Mine's a little different, but it still works. And as you can see here, it did a SFTP upload to the maintenance page. So now if we go to our applications URL, we should see a maintenance page. And you can see the system is down. We'll be back shortly. This is pretty handy, because now you can just turn it on and turn it off without having to do anything fancy besides entering this one command. Alright, but now if we go, so we know we disabled it, let's go back to our website and make sure we can still get back to it. Oh, oh, web enable. Alright, let's head back. And here we are, our application's working. So now what we can do is we can use callbacks again to take advantage of this task. Like for example, when you deploy, you want the website to be have a maintenance message because the server is going to be doing something else. So we can just go ahead and edit the cap file to do our new callback. So we say before deploy web disable, and then after deploy web enable. So now we can save this. Let's run deploy again to make sure this is all working properly. And you can see right there, it called the web disable, it's doing stuff, and then it restarted the application and called the web enable again. And at this point, our application has been updated, and it's called the restart thing, which was just going to restart Passenger after every single time by touching the restart.txt option. And that's pretty much a simple, basic working deployment. You can easily take advantage of some of Capistrano's other functionalities, like executing over multiple servers at the same time, or doing, multi-stage deployments. But now our application is running, and you can go on and show it to your friends or your potential clients. I hope that through watching this screencast you learned something about Rails deployments, and somehow maybe it's been demystified. I know it can be pretty confusing and there's a lot of moving parts, but when you get down to it, it's really not that complicated, and it can be very easy when you use the right tools. But some notes to take away from this is, this is the very basic setup of Postgres and Apache. If you're very serious about SE Linux, you can go and read on how you can create a directory with socket creation privileges, and you can further lock down your Postgres installation. But for just basic stuff, this works pretty easy, and you can install many Rails applications on Passenger very easily just by copying that virtual host. But I hope you guys learned something, and thanks for watching my screencast. If you want to find out more about me, you can check out my website, broadcastingadmin.com, or follow me on Twitter at adman65. Thanks.